Hey, fellow story lovers. This is Jonathan Cormer, tumbling into your pod feed to let you know that Season 3 of the Dork Tales Storytime podcast has begun. And just like our friends at Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory, we'll be unlocking new fairy tales, fables, and untold hero stories that will surprise you. Prepare for unexpected special guests. Find geeky twists and turns around every tale. Come with me and Mr. Reginald T. Hedgehog into our world of pure imagination. Find our scrum-diddly-umptious stories wherever you listen to podcasts or visit us at dorktalestorytime.com.
I won't visit Dogland and run with the power pups. You got to love their style and how they never, ever, ever give up. Who loves dogs? Who loves dogs? We rise to any challenge, and no one here is average. We are the power pups. You know we'll ever, ever, ever give up. Dogs, dogs, you love dogs. Dogs, dogs, you love dogs.
Hello and welcome to episode 14 of season 2 of the Adventures of Power Dog and Dogland. And this episode is called "And the Cow Toots Up to the Moon."
Totally. And
It's episode 14 if you like Taylor or any of the other characters. I said this in 13, but if you haven't, we would like to know. You don't have to if you don't want to, but if you want to, be sure to tell us.
Yeah.
It would be awesome.
Yeah. We'll link to how you can reach us in our show notes. Nice, Hank.
Yahoo!
Yahoo! Hello, listeners. You may remember when our story left off that we had just met a really awesome cow named Taylor who travels the galaxy. The pups ate some units of energy called smushrooms that look like big, wet, juicy mushrooms, and they waved goodbye from Taylor's back as they all took off with a... They touched down onto solid ground on the floating moon of the College of the Dog Arts right in the middle of the gardens, and dogs came running from all corners to greet them excitedly. Tuffy and Power Dog, sitting atop Taylor's back, both felt energized. They looked at each other, smiled, and both did absolutely acrobatic flips off of Taylor's back, landing perfectly in the soft grass. Woohoo! They both cheered in unison. Look at us, exclaimed Tuffy. Yeah, said Power Dog. I think it's the smushrooms. Tuffy nodded in agreement as they set off sprinting to Tick-Tock Bunny's cottage to put a note on the door, asking anyone and everyone to please help care for the gardens. Before they turned tails to head back to Taylor and the gang, they saw a small envelope with the words, "Open in case of emergency," written on it. The envelope was lumpy and small. They opened it. Inside was a tiny silver whistle on a string. It looked a lot like the larger silver whistle that Tick-Tock sometimes wore when he led the physical fitness and martial arts trainings. They smiled, and as Tuffy started to put the whistle around his wrist by the string, Power Dog put out his paw and said, maybe I should hang on to the whistle, Tuffy. Tuffy looked confused. What? Why? Power Dog didn't want to say it was because he was Power Dog, the dog of many powers, and also several months older than Tuffy. But it looked like he was going to have to. Well, I just wouldn't want you to be stressed out by it, he said. Tuffy laughed and said, I'm Tick-Tock Bunny's apprentice. He left this for me. Chill out, Power Dog. I can handle holding on to a whistle. Power Dog looked around, thought about protesting, and then said, Okay, Tuffy, Just let me know if you want to trade off, okay? At this point, Tuffy was a little miffed and just shrugged and said, yeah, okay, whatever, cuz. And then he secured it around his wrist and said, we better be getting back anyway. They both shook it off and made their way across the grounds quickly, finding that their strength and energy felt boundless. It kind of makes sense, said Tuffy, who was pretty happy to be changing the subject. We need vitamins and minerals to be strong and healthy. The mushrooms must be like super vitamins. Absolutely, agreed Power Dog as he did a quick kick off of a bank of stones and then ran sideways along a garden wall. Was he showing off for his cousin? Sure, but that was okay because Tuffy said, whoa, and followed suit. Neither of them had ever even tried moves like these, let alone landed any. It felt amazing. When they got back to the lawn that Taylor had landed upon, they found Taffy and Fetcher spreading the news with educators and scholars, while Taylor was busy sniffing the flowers and enjoying the way that the delicate little moon doggerflies kept coming to rest on the tip of his nose. Taffy and Fetcher had learned that a convoy of scientists were joining researchers from all over Dogland back on the Meowie communications platform so that they could study the Dragon Ball and try to communicate with those trapped inside of it. Hey, do we need to eat more mushrooms? Asked Power Dog eagerly. What are mushrooms? Boomed a familiar voice. Power Dog and Tuffy perked up, whirled around, and hollered, Bear Chop! As they saw their dance teacher headed their way. Hey, pups, your sibs caught us up on all the crazy deets, and I just want to wish you the best, safest journey. They nodded and hugged Bear Chop tightly. She looked down at their sweet faces, smiled cheerfully, and said, and don't forget your moves. If you need them, they're there for you. You both are better than you think, and you're even better when you use them together. They both smiled and laughed and said, okay. Power Dog pulled a couple of mushrooms out of his cape to show them to Bear Chop and the other college dogs. He was just about to pop a smaller one into his mouth when Taylor mooed and said, moo, no, not just yet. Trust me, you do not want any extra. And then he laughed and tooted and smiled. Power Dog thought, oh, I don't mind if they give me the toots. I'm a dog. We love to toot. And so, when no one was looking, he popped the little mushroom into his mouth anyway. Yum, he thought as he looked forward to another burst of energy. Hop on, pups, hollered Taylor. Fetcher bowed his head and held out a paw, beckoning the other three to hop up first and said, I'll take up the rear of the line, fam. Power Dog eyed Fetcher and looked up and down the length of Taylor's back and shook the idea off. Nuh-uh. You can go first, Fetcher. Fetcher's eyebrows shot up and he said, no, I should be the last. I'm the biggest dog, I have the longest arms, and technically I'm the oldest. At this, Taffy just laughed and said, brothers, who cares? Come on, just hop up in any order. Tuffy nodded in emphatic agreement. Power Dog didn't want to explain that he would be the strongest because he'd snuck an extra mushroom, but he wasn't going to take no for an answer on this one. So instead, and knowing his brother better than anyone, he said, What's the matter, Fetcher? Are you afraid to go first? Power Dog, what has gotten into you? Asked a rather shocked Fetcher. No, Obvi, I am not afraid to go first. Fine, I'll go first. You better just promise me that you will hang on tight. Power Dog shrugged and smiled at all of their concerned faces and then did a little apology. I'm sorry, guys. He wasn't going to fess up about this mushroom, and he also wasn't going to tell them how nervous he was about all of this. There were simply too many lives at stake now. It would be okay if they were all a little mad at him, if that's what it took to save their lives. And so, there they were, sitting atop Taylor's back. Fetcher was in the lead, hanging on by the wiry fur on the back of Taylor's large neck. Then Taffy, hanging onto both Taylor's shoulder fur and Fetcher, then Tuffy hanging onto Taffy, and then Power Dog taking up the end of the doggy chain, seated up and against Taylor's twirling tail and hanging onto Tuffy as tightly as could be. Taylor reared up on his hind legs, pointed towards space, and took off with a as they rose up to the very top of Dogland's atmosphere. You remember that word, right? Atmosphere? It means the air around a planet. Anyway, as they rose up to the edge of the atmosphere, Taylor burped out 5 bubbles. The first 4 of which came to land on a dog's head, and the 5th on his own head. The bubbles surrounded their heads and felt light yet strong. Taylor hollered, "These keep you breathing safely as we travel through space." They all smiled and nodded. Taffy poked her bubble a little and noticed it was very soft and strong. They moved their heads a bit inside their bubbles, and the bubbles moved with them. "This is so cool," exclaimed Fetcher. "Okay, pups, hang on and hold on tight. Space is bumpy." Taylor tooted swiftly and flew ever faster, tooting along. Taffy began to remember her time on the asteroid and realized she was actually good at all of this. She surprised herself when she realized that although it was a little uncomfortable at first, she wasn't scared. She also had the thought, "I never thought I'd go back into space." And realizing this could be seen as lucky by those who love to travel the universe, like Tick-Tock Bunny, she felt a little extra satisfied. Next, they shot through the very edge of the atmosphere of Dogland. Suddenly, they could not hear the Dogland hum anymore. All they could hear was Taylor's rocket toots. And they would find out later that they could only hear the toots because of the air inside their bubbles. Later, they would learn how space is a vacuum, and not the kind you clean your house with, but a place without air or water molecules. And it turns out that sounds need air or water molecules to carry their vibrations to and into our ears. It's not that space is a quiet place, it's just that the way we, and the dogs, hear sound is dependent on the little things, these little molecules we cannot even really see. Taylor's twirling tail was tickling Power Dog and making him feel a little dizzy, so he scooched in a little snugger to Tuffy, who grabbed onto Taffy more tightly. She adjusted herself and looked down to see that the tiny silver whistle on a string around Tuffy's paw was coming loose and floating up. She took one hand off of Fetcher to grab it, and then she found herself floating off of Taylor. Everyone started to freak out as Tuffy and Power Dog, holding onto her as a bit of a doggy chain, were now also starting to float off of Taylor's back. Taffy was still holding on tightly to the tuft of Taylor's fur, and Fetcher strained to look back, and his eyes almost popped out at the sight. He quickly tucked a hind leg under the rope, holding Taylor's bag of mushrooms, and whirled around to pull them all back. Their eyes were all wide, and Power Dog was attempting to use his hover powers in reverse, for the first time ever, to drive them back to Taylor's back. He kicked out his legs and did some fancy twirling moves with his feet, as if to dance them back to safety. Tuffy did the same thing along with, and to everyone's relief, it worked. That was the moment that Power Dog knew he was right about being the strongest. Power Dog felt so relieved to be traveling with his pack and keeping them all safe. Of course they could make a chain and harness their powers, but especially his powers, together. "Huzzah!" yelled Fetcher into his bubble as they all returned to Taylor's back safely, each one of them now making sure that one paw was grasping a bit of Taylor's fur and the other paw was clutching a fellow dog. They hugged into each other as tight as possible, heads on shoulders, and stared ahead at the marvelous sights of space. As they traversed the special part of the universe known as the Dogmos, they saw bright orange starry clouds called nebulas, and they saw icy comets traveling along their orbits far away. They saw their own great sun, but made sure not to look right at it. They knew their sun was also a star to other parts of the universe. They saw mini stars called pulsars with tiny planets or asteroids zipping around them at dizzying speeds. Way off in the distance, Power Dog caught a glimpse of a vast bagel-shaped ring containing hundreds of thousands of little rocky asteroids. Maybe it was even millions. It was then that he noticed that he was now feeling exhausted more than usual. Was the mushroom energy wearing off? Was it space itself? He felt weakened and hoped that his strength would return when they got to Draconis. He reminded himself not to get too anxious and to just wait and see what might happen next. Besides, he still had more mushrooms in his pockets. And what could possibly go wrong as long as they were all together, he thought as he hugged Tuffy just a little more tightly. Taylor's swiftly twirling tail and thumping purring Toots were no longer tickling Power Dog. Instead, they were now a bit mesmerizing. That is to say, that tired, depleted Power Dog started to totally space out, and he relaxed for the first time in a long while. He felt his calming body affect Tuffy, whose body also relaxed, and the relaxation traveled up through the doggy cuddle chain, and they all settled a bit on Taylor's gigantic back. Power Dog felt his eyelids grow unbearably heavy, and he even started to doze. He had the thought, "No, I want to stay awake and see everything." But that wasn't enough, and he nodded, head flopping down, and he even drooled a little on Tuffy's shoulder. The drool scooted along into little floating bubbles that tickled Tuffy's shoulder as they rolled along and then flew off into space. Tuffy giggled and wriggled a little from the surprise of being tickled by floating drool bubbles, and as he craned his neck to smile at his cousin, his eyes grew wide with fear, as it was only then that he saw that Power Dog had gone completely limp and was quickly floating back off of and away from Taylor. Tuffy screamed into his bubble, "No!" Now, Tuffy didn't hear that at first, but she felt her twin's energy change and felt him grab on tightly. She turned to also see Power Dog floating, and she grabbed onto Fetcher more tightly as she yelped, "Power Dog!" into her bubble. Fetcher felt Taffy's grip and turned as well, and before he could even think, he just leaped for his brother and grabbed him by one paw. Taffy and Tuffy held onto Fetcher by his hind legs, and they began to slowly pull the brothers back. Taylor didn't seem to hear or notice a thing, and just kept rocketing through space and tooting along. This mode of transportation was not feeling amusing in this moment. Traveling by galactic farting cow was actually pretty risky. Power Dog's eyes popped open when he felt his brother grab his paw, but as he jerked and twitched in response, Fetcher lost his grip on Power Dog. Power Dog did his absolute best to rev his internal engine, and he tried to fly and even flip and dance back to them, but instead he just went spinning off on his own, falling and floating away from them. "No, no, 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 no!" he yelped. "Oh, how? Oh, why? How could this happen?" He was still spinning like a top in space, but he caught a glimpse of them every time he came round. But about the third or fourth time he spun, they all realized just how actually fast Taylor was rocketing the other 3 dogs through this vast Dogmos. Power Dog saw Tuffy hold up the tiny silver whistle and bounce it off of his air bubble repeatedly as he tried, in vain, to get it up to his mouth to blow on it, certainly as hard as he could, but he could not get that little whistle past the bubble. Taylor, Fetcher, Taffy, and Tuffy were nearly out of sight so fast, and Power Dog just kept falling and spinning, slower and slower and slower and slower. And then he was all alone, floating in space. Oh! He howled mournfully. No! He cried. He reached his paws towards where he had last seen them, and he reached his super sight vision as far as he could. But all he could see now in that spot were a few blinking stars. Were they now one of those blinking stars? Was he a tiny blinking star? He floated alone, staring at the distant flickers of light, and he began to cry into his bubble. What now? He asked the Dogmos out loud. What now? All right, that's it for now. We will continue this story in our next episode. Now I'm joined by my co-author, my kid, Hank. Hi, Hank.
Hi. We're ready for a joke, aren't we?
Already? Okay, yeah. I was going to ask you if you would ever think about traveling through space. What do you think?
Yeah.
You would?
Oh, yeah.
In a rocket? Or would you travel on a farting cow? What would you do?
Of course I would travel on a Toot-powered rocket machine that's powered by cows.
Nice. I like it. It would be amazing if they could invent a way to power rockets with cow toots.
Hey, Mom, are you ready for a joke?
Yes.
Why did the cow jump over the moon?
Why?
To get to the Milky Way.
Thank you, listeners. If you liked what you heard, you can see more content at our website, PowerDogAdventures, all one word, .com. There you can sign up for our infrequently emailed newsletter and also submit any good dog jokes. And we'll be forever grateful if you feel like telling your friends about the show too. If you are looking for more great shows, then please check out the other members of Kids Listen, a grassroots organization dedicated to high-quality audio for kids and families. There are well over 100 great shows to find there. Ask your grown-up to check out kidslisten.org to find out more. Special thanks to our creative partner, the inimitable Jason Rourke, who makes these stories sound extra good with his wise counsel, recording, sound design, and even original music. This podcast has been made possible in part by funding provided by the Regional Arts and Culture Council in Portland, Oregon. Thank you, RAC. It has been made even more possible by listeners like you. Thank you so much for your support, and extra big thanks to our Patreon patrons who get early access to all of our episodes ad-free, as well as goodies and merch and birthday shout-outs at any level of support. We are not joking even a little when we say we could not do this without you. The Adventures of Power Dog and Dogland is created in the ancestral lands of the Cowlitz, Multnomah, Kathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Tualatin Kalapuya, Wasco, Molalla, Watlala, bands of the Chinook, and other indigenous nations and tribes of the first people who made their homes along the rivers here in what is now called Portland, Oregon. And special thanks to our own Granny and Gramps who helped us write and record our Power Dog theme song that you'll hear at the end of the episode. Hey, Granny and Gramps, what key did y'all say that's in?
It's in D for Dogland. Till they're done. Power dog, he won't give up. When we're chasing danger and we're riding across the sea, sure he's right there leading us up, barking with the seals. Power dog, he won't give up. Power dog, he won't give up. Chases problems till they're done. Power dog, he won't give up. When we're chasing trouble and we're riding across the stars, sure he's right there beside us, just holding our paws. Power dog, he won't give up. Power dog, he won't give up. Chases problems till they're done. Power dog, he won't give up. When we're chasing trouble and we're zooming through the stars, sure he's right there beside us, just a zapping near and far. Power dog, he won't give up. Power dog, he won't give up. Chases problems till they're done. Power dog, he won't give up. When we're hugging a volcano or we're straddling a storm, Power dog is right beside us at every little turn. Power dog, he won't give up. Power dog, he won't give up. Chases problems till they're done. Power dog, he won't give up. At night his panic foxes, in the days his platypuses. We herd them up and whoop them down. Our dog's right beside us. Come with me to Dogland. We've got special tales to tell. And when we come together, all our tails will wag as well. So come with me to Dogland, we've got special tales to tell. And when we come together, all our tails will wag as well. Woof, woof, wow.
Hi all, we're Kids Listen.
A nonprofit made up entirely of podcasters, parents, and teachers advocating for high-quality audio content for kids.
And we have a message for our LGBTQ+ listeners, families, and their allies.
You are beautiful.
You are special.
You are perfect, just the way you are.
We stand against any legislation that takes rights away from the LGBTQ+ community or any child.
And we are dedicated to creating content where all children are represented and heard.
Grown-ups, if you're looking to support the LGBTQ+ community,
we recommend donating to the Transgender Education Network of Texas at transtexas.org, Equality Florida at eqfl.org, or your local LGBTQ center.
Kids Listen will always be a safe space for you and your family.
And as always, thank you for listening.